A bone-chilling evening on the Colorado Plateau, headlights blazing through the thin mist in the sky, Deion Sanders sits on the sideline in his familiar hoodie, facing a crowd that has memorized the name Coach Prime. They see in him not just a college football head coach, but a living legend that America has built statues for decades ago. This is the only man in history to have played in both a Super Bowl and a World Series. The one who turned the idea of a two-sport athlete from fairy tale into reality with lightning speed and near-supernatural ball instincts. He won 2 Super Bowl rings, appeared in the World Series, became an NFL Hall of Famer, and is an indispensable name in every debate about the greatest cornerback of all time. Off the field, Prime Time was a cultural icon from flashy suits, gold chains, celebration runs the full length of the end zone, to arrogant quotes that any sports fan can recite. Then when he hung up his cleats, he didn't fade away like so many former stars. He moved to a new stage, NFL analysis desk, then head coach at Jackson State, drawing the nation's eyes to HBCUs, before causing another earthquake at Colorado, where every one of his games suddenly became a national event. Yet behind all that spotlight is a body that has been cut open no fewer than 14 times, a left foot that lost 2 toes just to keep him able to walk on the ground, a bladder removed and replaced with an artificial structure that turns every time he stands up into a small battle. Behind the dark glasses and half-smile is a man who once despaired enough to drive his car off a cliff, who saw 2 marriages collapse and watched his children grow up in the eye of the media storm. Behind the laughter and confident words are nights he couldn't sleep because of pain, fear of blood clots returning, haunted by the thought that he might collapse in front of the young players he promised to lead to a better future. But it is in those deepest dark places that Deion's will shines brightest. He refuses to let go, refuses to accept the role of victim, turning every scar into a living lesson for the next generation. Every morning, even when his body betrays him, he drags himself out of bed, taking slow but determined steps to the practice field, because he knows that if God kept him alive after the cliff, after the surgeries, after cancer, then the rest of his life isn't for complaining. It's for standing among young black men searching for a way out of the darkness, looking them straight in the eye and saying, "If I can still stand here, then you guys have no excuse to give up." If Deion's story behind the stadium lights touches you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so we can follow this scar-filled journey together. Now let's move to the next part of the video, returning to Fort Myers, where a black kid named Sanders learned how to outrun a predetermined fate. Fort Myers, Florida in the 70s, 80s was nothing like the tourist brochures with beaches and brightly lit cruise ships. For a black kid named Deion Sanders, it was a quiet war zone in America, where gunshots rang out and faded like a habit, where ambulance and police sirens became the familiar nightly soundtrack. Ramshackle wooden houses, peeling paint, rusted tin roofs crammed together on damp streets. On the porches sat men smoking, women huddled behind doors, kids playing ball next to scattered liquor bottles. There, the future of a black boy was usually painted in just 3 colors: poverty, addiction, prison. Deion's biological father, Mims Sanders, was the clearest embodiment of that picture. He went in and out of jail like it was seasonal work, disappearing for months, then reappearing on the sidewalk, sitting slumped with eyes dulled as if the light had long gone out. Every time he came home, he brought only one thing: the hunger of addiction. Money in the house vanished on nighttime outings, belongings gradually disappeared, leaving a cold kitchen and an empty fridge. To little Deion, he wasn't just a pitiful father, he was a living prophecy. If you slip, this is your future. His mother, Connie, grew visibly thinner year by year. She worked 2-3 jobs, cleaning, waiting tables, anything that traded time for a few dollars to feed her kids. Her hands cracked, her back ached, but every time she came home, she forced a smile, cooked something fragrant enough for the kids to forget their growling stomachs. Some nights Deion woke to the sound of furniture slamming, glasses breaking, and the slurred cursing of a drunk man. One time he saw Mims raise his hand, eyes bloodshot, reeking of booze and sweat, while Connie stood in front shielding him, shaking but refusing to back down. She grabbed Deion, hugged him tight, pulled him running into the bedroom, and slammed the door. Fists pounded on the wood, curses echoed through, and on the other side of that door, young Sanders sat curled in the dark, back pressed to his mother's chest, feeling her heart pounding wildly with fear. That scene wasn't just a memory, it was the first scar on a child's mind, teaching him that home isn't always safe. When Mims finally vanished from daily life, another man entered the house. Willie Knight, Deion's stepfather. Willie wasn't an angel. He brought home the smell of cheap liquor every evening, along with the exhaustion of hard labor. But unlike Mims, Willie paid the rent on time, brought food home, fixed the leaking roof, replaced burned-out bulbs. By day he was the provider, the one who taught Deion that a man gets up early, goes to work even when tired, finishes the job before thinking about fun. At night he sat alone in the living room, TV on low, bottle quiet on the table, eyes staring somewhere far away. To Deion, the image of Willie in the dim yellow light, his shadow stretching long on the wall, was the second warning. Even if you escape real prison, many men remain trapped in an invisible one of fatigue, disappointment, and the bottle. At school, Deion wasn't promised anything better. Teachers were already too busy to place high hopes on a boy who showed up in old clothes with eyes always on guard. They looked at the roster, saw the name Sanders, and thought, another one who'll drop out or end up in the system soon enough. Deion's friends fell away like leaves. One got arrested for petty theft, another got shot in a minor scuffle, another got hooked on drugs and vanished from the ball field forever. Local news occasionally named a familiar face, not in the sports section, but in crime reports. Each time, Deion didn't just lose a friend, he saw another version of himself swallowed by the Fort Myers trap. The whole neighborhood felt like one giant trap to him, narrow streets leading straight to prison, the graveyard, or a dead-end life, with no way out. Many nights he lay on his creaky bed, listening to police sirens outside, thinking, here, either you jump out, or you die inside. There's no third option. One afternoon, barely a teenager, Deion stood on a familiar street corner and saw Mims, his biological father, slumped on the sidewalk, back against a dirty brick wall, eyes blankly staring into nothing. The man who once carried him on his shoulders was now just a thin shadow, clothes rumpled, hands trembling around a cigarette. Deion didn't approach. He stayed far enough not to smell the liquor, close enough to clearly see the end of the road the whole neighborhood was heading toward. In that moment, he made a vow to himself, not spoken aloud, but carved in stone deep in his heart. He would run fast enough that even that man's shadow couldn't catch him. He would run away from Fort Myers, from the smell of booze, from the sirens, from his father's dead eyes. What Deion didn't know was that this vow, while saving him from the sentence of poverty, addiction, and prison, also became another sentence, a lifelong one to keep running, to stay strong, to succeed, to keep moving forward, because if he ever stopped even for a moment, everything he'd fled would come rushing back, catch up, and swallow him, just as it had so many other men in Fort Myers. North Fort Myers High School sat on the edge of the city, amid pothole-riddled roads and weary single-story homes, looking nothing like a machine churning out the American dream. The football field was a patchy mix of green and yellow grass, with faded yard lines and old metal bleachers that creaked with every slightly heavy step. In the afternoons, as the sun sank red behind the trees, dim yellow lights flickered on, illuminating peeling paint, rusted seats, and the faces of black, brown, and white students blended together in the same scene of poverty. To many, it was just an ordinary high school field. But for Deion Sanders, it was the only place in the world where he had the right to feel like he was more than zero. On that uneven grass, the boy from the stifling house suddenly became the center of attention. Deion played 3 sports: football, baseball, basketball. Friday afternoons, he was the cornerback whose speed made the bleachers erupt. Evenings, he was the basketball player leaping high to steal the ball in midair. Weekends, he stood in the outfield, eyes tracking every pitch. The name Sanders started getting called over the school PA more regularly, mentioned by coaches in team meetings, whispered by friends during lunch. For the first time in his life, beyond the cursing and the pitying looks reserved for a poor kid, Deion heard the sound of recognition. But every time the final whistle blew, Every time the school lights gradually dimmed, he stepped off the field, walked through the muddy parking lot, and returned to the house where he grew up. There, his mother was still bent over washing dishes with a back that hunched more each year. Bills still sat unpaid on the table. The old TV still crackled with local crime reports. His cleats still caked in mud. The number 2 on his jersey still soaked in sweat. But Deion knew the moment he crossed the threshold, he was no longer the three-sport star. He was back to being the kid teachers didn't expect much from, the son of a man who had vanished into the prison system, the child who always had to wonder if his mom would have enough money for milk tomorrow. One afternoon, as Deion stood huddled with a few friends in a corner of the field, laughing loudly, but with eyes still glancing toward the alley where gangs hung out, a police car pulled up. The door opened. A white officer stepped out, but not with a hand on his gun or a threatening tone. He walked straight toward the group of teens, scanned each face, and stopped at Deion, the smaller kid, but with sharper, more wary eyes than the others. He didn't ask, "What are you kids doing here?" He just asked, "Do you like football?" That simple question, in that moment, opened a door Deion had never imagined he'd walk through. The officer introduced him to the Police Athletic League, PAL, where cops use sports to keep kids away from trouble. He talked about training, games, the chance to get better, not better than others, but better than yesterday's self. Deion listened, half skeptical, half drawn to the idea of staying longer on the field instead of wandering the streets. But what kept him hooked to that conversation wasn't football. It was the look in the man's eyes. A white man in uniform, representing the authority his neighborhood usually only saw in handcuffs, looking at him for the first time like someone worth saving, not someone destined to get arrested. It was a rare moment in Deion's life, when he felt that, somewhere beyond his mom and a few relatives, someone believed he was worth investing time in. He started going to PAL, training more, running more, jumping more. Every highlight on the field, a pick, a long throw, a home run brought small bursts of applause that warmed his heart. But behind that noise, there was always a childish but ruthless voice whispering in his head, "One wrong step, and you'll end up like your dad. One slip, and you'll be sitting on the sidewalk with dead eyes like him." When friends invited him to hang out late, gather in spots the cops frequented, Deion thought of Mims slumped against the wall, his mom hugging him as they ran into the bedroom, the bottle on the table in front of Willie, and he turned and ran toward the field instead. With each passing season, Deion's stats at North Fort Myers High School grew more impressive. Coaches started talking to colleges, strangers began showing up in the stands with notepads in hand, and he felt both excited and terrified. Excited because the escape door from the Fort Myers trap seemed to crack open for the first time. Terrified because he knew if he missed grabbing it, it would slam shut forever. Then one day, a letter arrived with the Florida State University Warrior Head logo, thin paper like any other ad mailer, but heavy like a new verdict. Football scholarship, a chance to play at a high level, get on TV, leave that familiar area code behind. Deion held the letter for a long time, sweat from his hands soaking into the paper. To many it was just the next step for a talented athlete. To him it was the only ticket out of the sentence of poverty, addiction and prison that Fort Myers had already prepared for him. The night before leaving, the Sanders house was quieter than usual. Deion lay on his bed, eyes wide open in the dark. From the living room came the sound of his stepdad Willie talking to himself in front of the TV, the bottle thudding down on the table, the chair creaking. From the kitchen he faintly heard his mom Connie crying softly, holding it in, as if afraid her son would hear and hesitate. Between those two sounds, Deion lay still, feeling a clear invisible rope tightening around his chest. Tomorrow he would go. He would leave the narrow streets, the old field, the sirens. But deep down, he also understood that he wasn't truly escaping. He was just carrying with him a handful of spiritual debts, owed to his mom for the years she hunched her back for him, owed to Willie for those evenings alone in the living room, owed to Fort Myers itself for teaching him to fear enough to run. And from that moment, he knew to not fail those debts, to not fall into the hole his biological father had fallen into. He couldn't stop anymore. No matter how much glory he touched later, beneath all the stadium lights, Deion Sanders would forever be the North Fort Myers kid running from the shadow of a city that had nearly turned out the lights on kids like him. The team bus rolled into the Florida State University campus, and Deion Sanders looked through the dusty window at the towering bleachers like fortress walls surrounding Doak Campbell Stadium. This was no longer North Fort Myers with a few hundred people on rusted seats. This was FSU, where the stands could swallow nearly 80,000 people at once, where the roar was loud enough to drown out the inner voice of a kid from the poor neighborhood. National TV cameras swept through the rows, satellite trucks packed the lots, ACC, ESPN, ABC logos everywhere on banners. Deion stepped off, backpack over his shoulder, old sneakers still carrying the dust of Fort Myers, and suddenly felt so small that even his own shadow seemed about to be swallowed by the stadium lights. In many eyes here, he was just another black kid from Florida, a speedy freshman who could be replaced any time. Bigger, whiter guys from fancier high schools walked past, laughing loudly about scholarships and the NFL like it was a given. And Deion, despite bringing impressive numbers from North Fort Myers, still carried that threatened feeling: if you don't do something different enough here, you'll be forgotten faster than your dad was on that street corner. The FSU practice field was a different world. Grass smooth as carpet, a weight room so stocked that Deion just stood staring for a long while, overwhelmed. Every practice was a new battle, not just against the receiver across from him, but against the feeling of slowly blending into the crowd. In Fort Myers, touch the ball and the whole field knew your name. Here bigger names still dominated the depth chart, veterans, legends, the school worshipped. Deion quickly learned, if he just played well he'd only be another good cornerback fading from fans' memories. From the memory of his biological father quietly vanishing into the prison system, from the image of his stepdad Willie sitting silently on the sofa after work, he'd learned a brutal lesson: those who aren't loud enough get swallowed and forgotten by life. And he decided he wouldn't end up on that list. The moment prime time was born came during a night game under blazing national TV lights. Before the game, while teammates wore simple suits or polos, Deion chose the flashiest suit he could find, shiny chains, dark sunglasses even though the sun had set. He stepped off the team bus like he was walking out of a rap video, every step a silent declaration: I will not disappear. Was sustainable sing to us, which shall sing to us, il cabaris, ospect the pastifern to us, you will have to remember me. When reporters asked, he didn't say Deion Sanders, he introduced himself: prime time has arrived. That name back then wasn't just a funny nickname, it was the talisman of a kid afraid of being swallowed by darkness. Prime time was the armor he put on to hide the fear of being just a kid from the hood lost in rich kids' territory. From that second, every time he took the field it wasn't Deion, it was prime time, running, jumping, smiling, taunting. Every interception he returned with a defiant strut across the end zone, every punt return not just to score but to make the whole stadium lock eyes on his every step. The brighter prime time got, the more something inside the real Deion started to shrink. Those evenings in the dorm, after the stadium lights went out, after the teammates' noise in the hallway faded, the room left with just the ceiling fan and the chill of the AC. Deion was still the funny guy in the room, always with a joke, always with a line to make everyone laugh. But when the last door closed, when the desk lamp was the only light left, a different silence crept in. The Fort Myers kid suddenly resurfaced in his mind. He heard his mother's weary sighs somewhere in the past, his biological father muttering on the streets, the image of Willie cradling a bottle staring into a blurry TV screen. While the whole country increasingly knew the name primetime, those faces stayed untouched in a corner of memory no one reached. Sometimes he turned off the TV, lay on his back, stared at the ceiling and wondered, am I running from them, or running for them? Athletic success came like a storm. Deion became All-American, the nightmare of opposing quarterbacks. The name dropped on ESPN as heaven-sent talent, once-in-a-generation athlete. Every catch, every tackle, every punt return that blew up the stadium got clipped into highlights. Commentators talked about great genes, natural speed, God-given gifts. Every time he heard those phrases, Deion felt both proud and bitter. They saw him as the perfect product of a talent pipeline. They didn't see the child hiding behind his mom from a drunk father's rage, didn't hear the bottle slamming down, didn't smell the cigarette smoke in cramped houses. The battles he'd fought in Fort Myers, he carried them onto the field every time, but no one on TV mentioned them. And then prime time started spilling beyond FSU's boundaries. Newspapers wrote about him not just as a player, but as a cultural phenomenon. High school kids copied his celebrations, borrowed his style, called each other prime this and prime that. Deion from the outside was the living example of the American dream, from the poor neighborhood to the big stage, from gunshots to cheers. Few understood that this very moment was when a new trap was set. Because once the world loved prime time, who cared about Deion? Once what people expected was flashy suits, dark glasses, cocky talk. Who wanted to hear a serious story about fear of being forgotten, guilt toward family, the obsession with not becoming the next version of the father who sat on that sidewalk. The bigger it got, the more prime time gradually swallowed the person who created it. By the end of his FSU years, when the whole country knew prime time, when every camera followed his every sprint, Deion understood he had won the war against obscurity, but in exchange he had put on a mask that would later be very hard to take off. From that moment, success wasn't just about how many interceptions, he had to live up to the character the country expected. And none of the people cheering him knew that the guy wearing that glittering mask had already started cracking from the inside. When the name Deion Sanders was called at the NFL draft, and not long after came the MLB contract, the door he'd been banging his head against throughout his teenage years suddenly swung wide open, so wide that even he was overwhelmed. The Atlanta Falcons brought him onto the field as a special defensive weapon, while the New York Yankees put him on historic baseball diamonds. In just one season, the Fort Myers kid who once feared being forgotten suddenly became someone the whole country wanted to watch. His schedule was no longer measured in weeks but in hours. Afternoons in Atlanta, he wore the Falcons jersey, helmet on, chasing receivers across the field. By evening he might be in another city, in the Yankees' pinstripes, standing in the outfield under new stadium lights. Some days he flew from one football game to a baseball game, within 24 hours, dozing on planes, grabbing a cold sandwich in the car, then rushing onto the field as if his body had no limits. Life threw him from one stage to the next, giving him no time to wonder where he was going, just forcing him to run so he wouldn't fall behind his own name. The spotlight hit hard and fast. A few years later, he had Super Bowl rings on his finger, first with the San Francisco 49ers, then the Dallas Cowboys, heavy diamond rings every player dreams of. He appeared in the World Series with the Braves, becoming the rare icon who crossed the line between two sports without dropping the glow. $1 million contracts followed $1 million contracts. Walking out of stadiums, he climbed into gleaming sports cars, drove to gated mansions with high walls and security cameras. His wrists sparkled with expensive watches, his neck grew heavier with gold chains, and his closet had no room left for the cheap clothes of years past. America called him prime time, turning him into the symbol of flash speed and a new kind of cool arrogance. He was the face of commercials, talk shows, rap videos, a character who guaranteed that flipping on the TV wouldn't be boring. But the dark side of the two-sport life never made it on camera. When the cameras shut off, when the crowds thinned out, Deion returned to identical white-walled hotel rooms in every city. The AC hummed steadily, the TV played stale sports highlights in which he often appeared as a third-person character behind the two teams. He ate late dinners alone, not at a family table, but on a hotel bed, tray on the small table, dim yellow light shining on a Super Bowl ring that glittered but felt ice-cold. Somewhere, his kids were growing up. First photos, first steps, parent-teacher conferences, award ceremonies, most happened while he was in another city, in another uniform, in front of another crowd. He came home like a passing guest, hugged his kids for a few days, then grabbed his suitcase again. Each time he closed the door, his footsteps faded down the walkway, leaving behind a wife and children in a house emptier than before he was famous, because now everyone in it had learned to live around the schedule of a man who was always absent. Whenever the emptiness hit, Deion did what the culture around him encouraged: buy something more. A new car, faster and louder, a watch with more diamonds, a pricier suit for the next TV appearance. The first drive out of the showroom, the first time strapping on the new watch, he felt a brief rush, like slapping a colorful band-aid over a wound. But days later, the hollow in his chest remained, even deeper, because he was starting to realize no purchase could buy the feeling of being home when a kid was sick, no item could fill the missing laughter in his own kitchen. Prime time, the character America loved, wasn't allowed to be sad. He walked into post-game press conferences, body exhausted, mind tangled, yet still had to smile, drop a joke, toss out a cocky line for reporters to quote. On the field, he had to stay the provocateur, the fearless one who could stand in front of an opposing crowd and raise both arms as if asking, "Is that enough for you yet?" America had created and fed the primetime persona, like a sports superhero, and superheroes aren't allowed to be tired, weak, or say "I'm hurting." If he showed a hint of vulnerability, they'd call it drama, attention-seeking, the decline of the image. So he swallowed it all, making every appearance push the invincible bar higher. Inside, Deion started feeling more like a product than a person. He saw himself as a non-stop TV show, NFL in the fall, MLB in the summer, commercials in between. People turned him on, laughed, marveled, argued, then turned off the TV and went back to their lives. And he, after the show ended, still faced cold hotel rooms, red-eye flights, missed calls from family, half-finished conversations with kids growing up without knowing the smell of their dad's sweat. Some nights, after a hyped big game, after the applause and praise for his greatness, he walked alone to the parking lot, ears still ringing with commentators calling his name. He opened the door of his sports car, sat down, hands on the wheel, but didn't start the engine. For a few minutes, he just sat, staring at his reflection in the glass, not with pride, but with a nagging, persistent question. If I disappeared tomorrow, if all these highlights stopped, would anyone remember Deion? Or just primetime, the character I created to escape the fear of being forgotten? That question, not the hits on the field, was what slowly cracked the outer armor, setting the stage for the collapse he'd face in the years ahead. By the mid-90s, on paper, Deion Sanders had touched everything a Fort Myers kid ever dared dream of. He had Super Bowl rings, played in the World Series, signed contracts, the press called massive. On TV, commentators used words like legend, game changer. But behind those labels was a personal life starting to crumble piece by piece. His first marriage ended in slammed doors and cold divorce papers. Home became a place of tension, no longer a refuge. Deion was pulled between two seasons, NFL and MLB, two teams, two cities, overlapping schedules. The media still praised him as the model of multitasking, the tireless man. But off-camera, in houses he barely stayed in long enough, there were angry phone calls, accusations, unanswered. "When are you coming home?" His young children heard their dad's name on TV more than his voice reading bedtime stories. It was the phase where, outwardly, Deion had never been busier, richer, or more successful, but inside, he felt like a guitar string stretched to the breaking point. Every time he stepped on the field, he had to keep playing invincible, keep dancing, joking, taunting, because the world was used to that version. At home he faced his ex-wife's weary eyes, built-up exhaustion, piling financial responsibilities, the feeling of being both used, and the one hurting those closest to him. That contradiction had no outlet. It built like pressure in a sealed pot, unseen, unheard, until one night in 1997. It was a night Deion no longer clearly remembers how it started. Maybe an arguing phone call, maybe a sports segment treating him like merchandise, maybe a sudden realization he didn't know what grade his kid was in. He drove out of the city, no music, no calls. City lights faded behind, leaving only sparse street lamps and darkness on both sides. In his head everything spun: money, fame, contracts others called blessings, but felt like chains, guilt toward his kids and wife, people who only came around when it benefited them, lifting him as an idol, then quickly turning away if he no longer met expectations. The feeling of being misunderstood, boxed into a role he'd created himself, wore him down until he no longer knew who he was beyond prime time. On a deserted stretch, with a cliff drop and pitch-black void below, Deion stopped the car. He sat still, hands on the wheel, listening to the engine idle, his own heartbeat. In that moment, the thought didn't strike like lightning, but arrived like a guest who'd been waiting outside a long time. What if it all ends tonight? If I disappear, everyone would be free. No more schedule, no more questions, no more acting. He accelerated. The road ahead was no longer part of the way home, but a runway to absolute silence. As the car went over the edge, he didn't scream. The world shifted to slow motion, metal crunching against rock, glass shattering, headlight beams smearing into streaks in his eyes. In those seconds between sky and ground, Deion felt something he'd never admitted to anyone. I want to die. I can't take it anymore. Then everything stopped. When he opened his eyes, he was still in the driver's seat. The body was mangled, glass broken, dirt and rocks covering the hood, but it didn't look like the fatal wrecks you see on the news. His body hurt but wasn't shattered, as he'd expected. The car wasn't totaled the way it should have been after plunging off a cliff. Around him was darkness and silence, only the engine whining as it died. Deion turned it off, sat in the heavy quiet, and started crying. Not from physical pain, but from a mix of shame and bewilderment. He was angry at himself for cowardice, choosing to drive off a cliff, instead of facing what he'd caused. He was angry at the life that pushed him to a brink with no way back. But above all, he couldn't understand one thing. Why am I still alive? Why didn't this car become the coffin I thought it would? In the darkness he was torn between two opposing feelings: disappointment that the plan to end everything had failed, and a deep fear because he suddenly felt spared from a sentence by an unknown judge. The next morning, no news reported a star's fatal crash.
No R.I.P. Deion Sanders ticker on screens.
The world went on as if nothing had happened, and he in a strange way did too. He showed up at practice, in the locker room, boarded the plane for the next game. He smiled with teammates, answered interviews, dropped the jokes fans expected. No one in the press room, no one in the stands knew the man in front of them had tried to kill himself just hours earlier. From that day on, every smile for reporters was a lie. Every road he ran wasn't just to beat the receiver, but to escape that night. The image of the car hanging in midair. The darkness after the plunge didn't lighten. It grew heavier, thicker, layering guilt over old exhaustion. But in that deep pit, something new started to spark. The question, why didn't I die, stuck to him like a shadow. Deion began going to church, at first just for a quiet place away from hotel rooms, fields and arguments. He sat in the back row where few recognized him, cap pulled low, listening to sermons he'd once seen as irrelevant. One day the pastor spoke about being kept alive for a reason, about people who should have died in accidents or illness, but lived because God wasn't done with them. Deion sat in the back, feeling like someone was retelling his own cliff night. Not every doubt vanished overnight, but for the first time, he had an explanation beyond luck for why he was still breathing. From sleepless nights, hours staring at a TV he wasn't watching, Deion started writing. The first pages of the book Power, Money and Sex, How Success Almost Ruined My Life weren't for sales or PR but a confession written for himself. He wrote about power, money, sex, the three things society says are success's rewards, but for him had become nooses. He described driving out of the city that night, the moment the car left the road, opening his eyes in darkness, and realizing he was still alive. Putting it on paper was both a way to force himself never to forget, and a way to admit, I reached the point of wanting to die in a life everyone thought was perfect. That night the car plunging off the cliff didn't kill Deion Sanders, at least not physically, but it did kill one version of him, the version that believed enough success, fame and purchases would fill every void. That night ended that illusion, however it didn't instantly birth a better man. Between the old Deion who ran from darkness, and the new Deion who dared face it, lay a vast emptiness he would take many years, many mistakes, many tears, and flickering faith to gradually fill. And in that emptiness, he would continue being both a legend on the field, and a man learning from scratch how to survive with himself. After the night driving off the cliff and the first pages of his confessional book, Deion still had to keep living in the world he'd built, a world of schedules, contracts, highlights, and family. His first marriage to Carolyn came during the phase when he was climbing fastest. When they got married, Deion was still a rising star, shuttling between cities, living by timetables drawn up by teams, sponsors, and TV networks. Their first kids arrived right when he was busiest. Some evenings, in a distant state, he scored a touchdown, strutted down the end zone amid roaring crowds, fireworks exploding, commentators screaming prime time over the mic. At the exact same time, hundreds or thousands of miles away in a house, Carolyn held a baby in her arms, turning down the volume so the child wouldn't startle, rocking it while watching her husband on TV. The kid looked up at the screen, pointed at the man dancing in celebration, and asked, "Who's that?" The answer, "That's your dad," sounded both proud and painful, because the man on the screen was rarely standing in their own living room. The marriage to Carolyn didn't explode from one single event. It cracked gradually with every season, every flight, every time Deion chose to stay a few extra days for a commercial shoot or event instead of flying home. Important conversations got replaced by rushed texts, apologies sent over the phone, family dinners swapped for midnight calls when he was already exhausted. Silence crept into the gaps between them, growing so thick that neither had the courage to tear it open with an honest talk. In the end, it didn't finish with shouting, but with cold divorce papers. Signing them, Deion felt like both victim and perpetrator. Victim of an inhuman schedule, of an industry that glorifies the man who makes money but rarely asks what price he pays at home. But at the same time, he knew he was the perpetrator. He was the one who nodded to every contract, every trip, every choice of career over sitting in a small bathtub reading stories to his kids. No one forced him to take it all, but he did. And now the price was a first family shattered like glass on tile. Then came Pilar. Deion's second marriage arrived in a different context. He was a bit past his peak but still a big name, big enough to turn family life into a reality TV show. The huge mansion, high gates, pool, basketball court, home theater, all on camera as the backdrop of a perfect American dream. The show Deion and Pilar, primetime love, let viewers into breakfasts with laughing kids, fun workouts, playful husband-wife moments in front of the lens. The perfect family image of a black sports superstar became entertainment consumed by millions. But the cameras only captured laughter. They didn't film the two of them closing the bedroom door after the crew left, leaving heavy silence and built-up accusations. They didn't record the nights Pilar felt like a supporting actor in a show named after her husband, or the moments Deion felt surrounded, not just by love but by expectations, pressure, and the shadow of the primetime brand he'd created. The gap between the staged life for viewers and the real scratches behind it made everything more fragile. The more the cameras tried to paint perfection, the clearer the inner cracks became to those living in the house. When the second marriage fell apart, it wasn't quiet like the first. This time the divorce played out under police lights and paparazzi flashes. Police came to the house after a heated altercation. Reports noted allegations of violence from both sides. Lawyers appeared. Lawsuits and countersuits flew back and forth. Both were hurt. Both felt unfairly treated. And in the middle, as always, were kids who never chose this chaos. The custody battle dragged on, each side with a team of lawyers, every new day another article. Deion, from sports hero and symbol of hard work and determination, suddenly became fodder for cheap talk shows where his private life was dissected like entertainment. Who's right, who's wrong, who's lying, who cried in court. For the children it wasn't content anymore. It was their childhood. They saw their dad's name in papers and online, but not for on-field achievements, for divorce scandals, clips outside the house with police, vicious comments from strangers who'd never met their father. They went to school, classmates whispered. Teachers looked at them with half pity, half curiosity. Visitation times were clocked, dictated by court schedules and lawyers, not real father-child feelings. In those short visits, not every kid had the words to ask directly, but the lingering question was always there. Why does mom say that about dad? Why did Dad say that about Mom on TV? If you both love us, why do we have to split between two houses, two schedules, two lawyers? Deion, who'd faced thousands of screaming fans, ferocious quarterbacks, giant wrestlers, often stood in front of his own kids not knowing how to answer. He knew any response would hurt someone, their mom, them, or himself. And so many times he chose silence, just hugging them tighter, hoping his arms could say what his mouth couldn't find words for. A person can learn to handle millions hating them online, but it's much harder to handle the disappointed look in a child's eyes when they realize you're not the perfect hero TV portrayed. Deion had lost games on the field, been beaten by opponents, suffered injuries, but no loss hurt like seeing his child quietly shrink when someone mentioned his name as a scandal, not a role model. In the years after, as the legal storm settled, media moved to fresh prey, assets were divided, custody arranged. Deion started looking back at the wreckage of his private life with less self-justification. He could blame the career, the system, the media, the schedule, but deep down he knew some choices were his alone, and those choices left scars no camera captured, no article fully described, but that would stay with his 5 children for the rest of their lives. Somewhere in this late-coming maturity journey, Deion realized something he hadn't grasped when younger. Some losses don't show on scoreboards, aren't recorded in record books, have no commentator yelling about them nationwide, but they etch deep into children's memories. And those losses, no matter how many Super Bowl rings, highlights, or titles he had, he'd never get a rematch for. After 2 failed marriages, the Cliff Night, and years learning to be honest with himself, Deion still carried one unpaid debt to kids like the Fort Myers boy he once was. Every time he returned to poor neighborhoods, seeing black boys running barefoot on sidewalks, tossing an old ball amid distant sirens, he saw himself. Payel had pulled 13-year-old Deion away from gangs and dark corners. Without the field, his name today might only appear in police files. That thought stuck. If I was saved, I have a responsibility to give back. From that feeling, the Prime Prep dream was born. The initial idea was so beautiful even he believed it would heal part of his own life. A school for disadvantaged kids in Dallas, Fort Worth, where football, basketball, academics, and discipline together saved them from the streets. A place where they didn't just learn routes or shots, but math, reading, writing, history. A place where kids once seen as problems were seen as potential. Deion met parents, communities, pitched with burning eyes. I want to build a place where your kids don't have to choose between football and books. They can have both. They picked a name, logo, uniform colors. Opening day, kids in Prime Prep jerseys lined up side by side, posing with Coach Prime. That was the image he thought he'd look back on with pride forever. But building a dream and running it are very different. Deion was a field legend, a locker room master, but not a professional education administrator. Prime Prep was a charter school, living on per-student state funds plus donations, sponsorships, contracts. Cracks appeared early, complicated paperwork, tangled state procedures, internal disputes among co-founders. Cash flow grew murky, financial reports didn't match, promised donations arrived late or not at all. Meanwhile, teachers still taught, lunches still served, balls still inflated, uniforms still issued. Some teachers started getting paid late, some waited weeks, months. They loved the kids but had bills too. Some left. Those who stayed grew tired and bitter. Students saw constant teacher turnover, disrupted classes, ungraded assignments. Promises of an ideal learning environment became wall slogans instead of classroom reality. Deion still showed up, tried to motivate, used his fame to chase more funding, but he was one man. While Prime Prep needed a tight management team he hadn't built yet. The press, as usual, smelled blood, minor issues, misentered grades, late filings, teachers venting online, quickly blew up into big headlines. Deion Sanders' school in chaos, Prime Prep off track, sports superstar, education disaster. TV reports showed messy hallways, interviewed angry parents, painted a school built on glamour but lacking foundation. To distant viewers, it was an entertaining story, hero falls. To the kids and teachers inside, it was dinner, future, safety threatened. The climax came when the state investigated. Education officials scrutinized every number, contract, meeting minute, financial, administrative, procedural errors surfaced. People who'd shaken hands at openings started blaming each other. Who handled what? Who signed papers? Who promised funding and didn't deliver? In closed meetings, voices rose, fingers pointed. Outside, parents panicked. My kid's mid-year. What now? Will diplomas be valid? What do we do? When the state revoked the charter, Prime Prep was forced to close mid-school year, not over summer, not after graduation, but in the middle of a normal year, when kids were settling into desks, teachers, teammates. Suddenly they were told, the school will no longer operate, you have to transfer elsewhere. Scenes of kids carrying boxes of books, jerseys, Prime Prep badges hastily stuffed into backpacks, walking out the gate under angry and desperate parent eyes haunted him for years. Then the most personal blow, a former financial director accused Deion of assaulting him during an argument. From an internal dispute, it escalated to a lawsuit, police report, headlines pairing assault with his name. Deion insisted he wasn't violent, that the story was twisted to make him look monstrous. But in media world, denials are always weaker than the initial sensational claim. He went to court, faced cold lawyer questions, saw his name next to words he never imagined linked to him in a school context. Lose a game, he could review film, train, come back and beat the opponent next week. But Prime Prep failure had no rematch. For Deion it hurt more than any time an opponent blew past him on the field, because this time he didn't just hurt himself, he hurt the very kids he'd sworn to protect from the path I once walked. He wanted to do right, but lack of experience, structure, people willing to say slow down, turned the dream into something he dreaded, a nightmare bearing his own name. The final night clearing out Prime Prep, hallways empty, no more kids joking, no basketball shoes squeaking on tile, just suitcase wheels, cardboard scraping, lockers once stickered with kids' names gaped open, empty inside, a few old test papers fluttering in the breeze. Deion walked slowly down the rows, fingers lightly brushing metal scratches, scratches of youth, of days they believed this was where new lives started. He felt like he was walking a crime scene with no official verdict, but a conscience sentence already passed. Afterward, Prime Prep became old news to most. People moved to the next scandal, next star, next drama. But in Deion's heart it remained one of the deepest scars, the one he talks about least, because every mention reminds him that sometimes he genuinely wanted to help others, and still ended up hurting them. Every time he visits a poor neighborhood, sees a black boy, in an old basketball jersey, clutching a ball walking alone on the sidewalk, he wonders, if I hadn't rushed, if I'd sat down to learn how to be a principal before hanging the sign, if I'd listened more to warnings, how many kids wouldn't have been yanked from the school I promised would be their safe place? It's a question without an answer, but it echoes in his head like sounds in Prime Prep's empty halls, where a Fort Myers boy's dream was hung high, then fell and shattered right in front of him. After Prime Prep collapsed, Deion did the one thing he knew best outside the field: return to the cameras. NFL Network swung the door wide open, welcoming prime time, as if the nightmare called that school had never happened. On screen he laughed, broke down plays, teased colleagues, dropped punchlines that had the whole studio cracking up. Viewers saw the familiar Deion, colorful suits, bold ties, confident smile, sharp takes on cornerbacks, receivers, modern defenses. Ratings stayed high, ads kept running, hashtags popped up regularly on social media. From a living room couch, you'd think, he's fine. Only Deion knew that every time the red light went off, every time he unclipped the mic, he remembered Prime Prep's empty hallways, the nameless lockers, the eyes of students and parents the day they were forced to leave. Sponsors still came knocking on Prime Time's door. They didn't care much about Prime Prep, or if they did, it was just an old scandal, a minor stumble in a big career. They wanted him in commercials, wanted his name on shoes, cars, clothes, insurance, banks. Every contract on the table had beautiful numbers, tempting terms. But along with them, inside Deion, came a stinging reminder: people only needed him to sell products, draw viewers, generate laughs. No one really needed him to teach anyone how to live, to guide kids away from the path he'd once walked. The teacher had failed at Prime Prep. only prime time still sold, and that feeling was both comforting and humiliating. Nights at home, with no studio lights, no producer counting 3, 2, 1, on air, Deion faced the silence he still feared. He opened the Bible, read a few passages, eyes scanning verses about forgiveness, redemption, God using broken people for great things. But many nights he couldn't focus, the words floated by, not sticking. He prayed, talking about sin, shame over the kids affected by prime prep, the children scarred by 2 broken marriages. After praying, he still felt something hanging unresolved overhead, unforgiven. Faith didn't vanish, but it was tested in a way he'd never experienced, not praying from a hospital bed after surgery, but praying in ordinary life, unsure if he even deserved another chance. Some nights he looked in the mirror, seeing not the short-haired 20-year-old, but a man pushing 50, with time etched on his face. The thought crept in, maybe just live like an aging celeb, make money, stay quiet, do shows, take contracts, provide for the kids, travel, stop messing with education or saving people. I tried and ruined it. It was a real temptation. Choose safety, silence, spend the rest of life in the comfort zone of old fame. Every time that thought surfaced, Deion remembered the 1997 Cliff Night, the question, why am I still alive? And a quieter, more persistent voice answered inside, if it was just to make money and stay quiet, I wouldn't have kept you that night. The new call came as a seemingly ordinary phone call. On the other end was a representative from Jackson State University, a small, historic HBCU long overlooked, with rundown facilities, and a barely noticed football program. They wanted him as head coach. The money wasn't glamorous. No $1 million deals like the NFL, no national spotlight like Power 5 schools. But they talked about young black men, many from neighborhoods like Fort Myers, attending a school once the pride of the black community, but now forgotten. They asked, do you dare come here and use what you know to change these kids' lives? That question hit Deion's deepest wound, the one he still dodged while holding a mic on NFL Network. In the days of thinking it over, Deion didn't just weigh money or fame. He thought about prime prep, the students forced to transfer, the parents who trusted him, then felt deep disappointment. He thought about the book he wrote on power, money, sex, and how for years his redemption story remained unfinished. If I say no, am I choosing safety for myself and ignoring a chance to fix part of my mistake? That question gnawed at him. Jackson State's offer didn't give much money, but it gave something rarer, a chance to try again as a teacher, this time under an established system, with history and community backing. In the end, Deion said yes, not because it was a career move or smart PR play, but because he feared that saying no meant God wouldn't give him another shot to turn scars into something better. He knew he'd face doubt, knew people would laugh, primetime coaching, just another show. He knew no one fully forgot prime prep, its shadow would follow him anywhere the word school appeared. But sometimes fear of God stopping using him was bigger than fear of public judgment. His first day stepping onto Jackson State's campus, no booming rap music, no red carpet, no fireworks, just old buildings rich with history, smooth lawns where students walked with backpacks, faded banners on light poles. Deion walked through the gate in silence, took a deep breath, inhaling air different from NFL stadiums. No fireworks smoke, but the smell of old books, the sweat of kids practicing dreams not yet formed. On Jackson State's field, the grass wasn't perfect, the locker room wasn't fancy, equipment was scarce. The young players looked at him with eyes mixed excitement and skepticism. Is that really Deion Sanders? Will he stick around for us? He looked back, saw his own 17-year-old self in their eyes, and understood that from now on it wasn't content for reality TV, it was life or death for a whole generation's future. That night, in the coach's dorm room, Deion sat alone, no cameras, no mic. On the table, an unfinished playbook, recruiting plans, player lists, and an open Bible. He knew starting tomorrow people would call him by a new name, Coach Prime. It sounded light, but carried a stone-heavy challenge. Would Coach Prime really be different from prime time? Would he dare talk less, perform less to listen, teach, except that he had to learn all over again? Jackson State, in the silence of that first night, wasn't just a new job. It was a proving ground where Deion's faith was tested once more. to see if the man who wanted to die in 1997, who shattered the prime prep dream, had the courage to live the rest of his life as a real teacher. The first morning at Jackson State, Deion walked into the locker room and almost laughed, not from joy, but from a déjà vu that caught in his throat. Old metal lockers, peeling paint, creaking hinges, floor stained with dried mud, bandage wrappers, athletic tape stuck fast, no one bothered to peel. Washing machines roared in the corner, struggling with faded uniforms, weight equipment rusted in spots, broken cardio machines pushed against the wall like decorations. Outside campus, Jackson, Mississippi's city, bore scars of historical racism, poverty, violence. Deion passed murals of civil rights leaders, faded Black Lives Matter chalk on sidewalks, and knew he wasn't just taking a coaching job but stepping into a long community story of being overlooked. Looking into the young player's eyes, he saw old Fort Myers staring back 18, 19-year-old kids from neighborhoods cops knew by name, families where dads were often absent, homes always weighing electric bills against groceries. They came to Jackson State not just to play ball but for one last shot at escaping the path statistics had drawn from poor neighborhood to prison. Deion dove into the work with the intensity of someone who knew he had no time to waste. He recruited not just with schemes but with his life story. I was you guys 30 years ago. If God pulled me out of Fort Myers, He can pull you out of wherever you're from. He called parents sat in worn living rooms, looked into the eyes of exhausted black mothers tired of system promises. Gradually, top recruits started choosing Jackson State over big schools. One, then two, then names big enough to shock college football. Why are they going to an HBCU? Then the explosion hit. Big wins afternoons when Mississippi Veterans Memorial Stadium packed so tight the stands shook with every play. The team went from a tiny ticker mention on ESPN to the main story. What is Deion Sanders doing at an HBCU? Coach Prime in the Jackson State revival. National TV cameras arrived. Reporters lined up for interviews. The old number 21 was now head coach in a JSU hoodie and cap, on the sideline pointing, yelling, hugging players. HBCUs, long seen as minor league, suddenly returned to America's sports map, not by calls from Washington but by long passes and thunderous tackles. In the locker room after big wins, the atmosphere became the closest thing to resurrection these kids had known. Players slapped walls, jumped on benches, screamed till hoarse. Some nights after comeback victories, Deion walked in without a word. He stood watching flushed, excited faces, eyes tearing up from feeling visible for the first time. Then he dropped to one knee in the circle, head bowed, tears and sweat mixing on the tile floor. "We pray," he said, voice thick. The room went silent, big arms on shoulders, heads down. In those brief minutes, outside noise vanished. Only thanks, pleas for forgiveness, promises to live better for moms, kids, community. For Deion, those were rare moments he felt he was doing exactly what he was born for. But glory never travels alone. With wins and spotlight came new pressure, new threats. Anonymous emails flooded in. Some accused him of using Jackson State for PR, called him showboat, self-loving, said he was exploiting HBCUs for his career. On social media, every clip of him motivating players, every strong locker room quote drew split comments. One side praising, the other cursing. Some nights he read a few lines then shut the screen, but the words echoed anyway. Every on-field win started a new off-field battle against people who'd never set foot in Jackson State yet thought they knew him better than he knew himself. Amid the whirlwind of glory and criticism, Deion's body started sending signals he tried to ignore. One night after a game, back in the coach's dorm, he took off his shoes and saw his left foot swollen, skin tight and shiny, occasional needle-like stabs. Lying down, numbness tingled from toes up the calf, like someone tying a rope tight around his leg and twisting. He grimaced, rubbed it, thought, turning 50, played a lifetime. Some pain is normal, just the price. Next morning he laced up anyway, walked the field all practice, jumped when the team scored, ran the sideline yelling at refs and players. Day after day the pain returned, heavier each time. At first only nights, then mornings, afternoons too. Some days on the field he felt a small fire burning inside his left calf. He shifted weight to the right foot, gritted teeth, kept coaching. Players heard him yell, "Keep going," not knowing every step along the sideline was crossing an invisible line between enduring and collapsing. Blood clots creeping through veins weren't loud like crowd roars, but more dangerous than any opponent he'd ever faced. Outside, people talked about Coach Prime building an empire, Deion changing the game at HBCUs. Inside, his body was quietly billing him for all those years of sprinting, cutting sharp, colliding, staying up late, endless flights, irregular eating. The hits from the NFL, the MLB games, the long coaching practices, everything piled up into tiny but deadly blood clots, slowly blocking the flow in his legs. He still thought he could diet, train harder, pop a few pills, pray, and it would pass. But the body isn't a locker room he could yell at to get in line. It has its own rules, and now it was enforcing them. One morning, after a nearly sleepless night from pain, Deion tried to sit up in his dorm bed. He swung around, planted his right foot on the cold tile floor, then slowly lowered his left like always. The instant his heel touched down, a knife-sharp pain shot up to his thigh. He jolted upright, letting out a groan he hadn't allowed himself in years. He tried again, gentler. This time his left leg felt nailed in mid-air. Any attempt to touch the floor triggered head-splitting pain. For a few brief seconds, the man who once ran 40-yard dashes like the wind, who leaped over receivers like gravity didn't apply, sat frozen on the edge of the bed, breathing hard, forehead beaded with sweat, hands clutching his calf, not understanding what was happening. No player saw that moment, no camera captured it, but it was the first clear, brutal warning that his body, the one that had carried an athlete's life and a coach's ambitions, was about to make him pay the full bill. From that morning on, Deion Sanders' story was no longer just about wins at Jackson State. It was about to enter its darkest chapter, when the legs that once carried him out of Fort Myers became the place fate hit hardest. As the pain in his left leg became a constant companion, as Jackson State went from forgotten program to the center of the HBCU map, another door, wider, brighter but colder, opened for Deion. Colorado, a Power 5 school in the Pac-12 at the time, with a high-altitude stadium, modern facilities, massive TV deals, sent an official offer. They wanted Coach Prime in Boulder. The numbers in the contract were unlike anything Jackson State could ever put on the table. Brand new weight rooms, state-of-the-art film rooms, wide-open recruiting budget, nationwide spotlight. Career-wise, it was the kind of invite any coach would struggle to turn down. But for Deion, it wasn't just a career upgrade. It was the question, what would he do with the community that believed in him when no one else did? Many nights he was torn in half. One half was the Fort Myers kid abandoned by the system, who knew what it felt like to be undervalued, and had now found a home in the HBCU world, where he wasn't just a coach but a symbol of black pride. The other half was a man nearing 60, who'd weathered enough storms to know a chance to lead a Power 5 program with unlimited resources didn't come around often. At Colorado, he could prove an HBCU coach didn't just belong in the minor leagues. He could step onto the biggest stage and compete as an equal. But if he left, he knew some would feel abandoned mid-journey. He prayed, asking God whether to stay or go. The answer didn't come as a voice from the sky, but as an uneasy feeling in his gut. If you only dare stay where you're applauded, what kind of faith is that? In the end, Deion chose Colorado. When the news broke, the backlash hit instantly. Part of the HBCU community felt betrayed. They remembered his speeches about rebuilding HBCUs, bringing the light back to black schools, and now saw him packing his bags for a wealthy, predominantly white school in the mountains. On social media, accusations poured out. He used HBCUs as a stepping stone, always just prime time, always chasing the brightest stage. He left for the money, not the mission. People who'd once called him a hero now called him an opportunist. The sharpest pain came from fellow black voices who'd seen him as their representative. Just another one who leaves us for something better for himself. At the same time, on the other side, many traditional white voices in college football didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat. To them, college football was a sacred ritual, century-old tradition, silver-haired coaches who spoke measured words and saw themselves more as professors than stars. They saw Deion's style, sunglasses, cap, chains, high-energy locker room clips, booming "we coming" declarations, and sneered clown, circus. This isn't the NFL, this is academia. So in a divided America, Deion suddenly found himself caught between two sides. One saying he'd abandoned the black community, the other saying he was too loud for their conservative white world. At Colorado, he set about doing something few coaches would do so bluntly: overhaul the roster. In his first meeting with the old Buffaloes players, cameras caught words that later became a meme and fuel for judgment. "I brought my luggage with me, and my luggage is Louis Vuitton. If you can't handle competition, the portal's right there." It wasn't just tough talk. It was a declaration he'd tear it down and rebuild. Dozens of young men who thought they'd finish their college careers in Boulder suddenly saw futures upended. Many lost scholarships, got pushed into the transfer portal, had to find new schools, their football lives thrown into uncertainty. The public split. One side praised his honesty and hunger to win, the other called him ruthless, treating players like pawns. Deion saw it all. He didn't pretend to be innocent. He knew every keep or cut decision affected a whole family behind some kid. But he also knew that keeping everything the same meant Colorado would stay the doormat team it had been every fall. In his head, the Fort Myers kid's voice returned: "Either you jump out or you die in there." Only this time his jump dragged dozens of others along, not just himself. Then came the first 3 games of the 2023 season, an explosion few Hollywood scripts would dare write. Colorado beat TCU, the team that had just played for the national title the year before in the opener, then Nebraska, then survived Colorado State in a wild double overtime derby. Viewership skyrocketed each week. Celebrities showed up around the team: gold-wearing rappers, NBA stars, NFL legends, Hollywood actors, FaceTime videos with former presidents, congratulations from power players, praise for a new cultural phenomenon flooded social media. The parking lot outside Colorado Stadium looked like an awards show red carpet. Every game became a nationwide entertainment event. But inside the locker room and on the sideline, the story was different. Deion took the field in a protective boot, often using a small scooter to get around. His left leg was no longer the power source for 40-yard dashes, but a ticking bomb. He felt every irregular heartbeat when adrenaline surged, every numb stab down his calf from standing too long, every post-game night when he removed the boot and saw his foot discolored and swollen. In front of the players he still yelled, still jumped, still said "we coming," still slapped one kid's helmet, hugged another's neck. But once the locker room door closed, no mics around, he sat down, sighed, ran his hand along his left shin like stroking a wild animal growling inside. Colorado exploded into a phenomenon. But Deion knew what few outside his doctors saw. His negotiation time with his body was nearly up. He had left Jackson State, left the HBCU world, where he'd promised to stay long-term, to come here. He had accepted letting others label him a traitor in debates he could never fully win. In return, he got the biggest stage, a chance to spread his message to millions, a chance for his son Shadur and close protégés to play at the highest level. But every morning waking up, trying to put his foot on the floor, every knife-like stab reminded him the deal with fate was reaching its end. No matter how much America hyped Coach Prime, no matter how many cameras hunted him from every angle, only he heard the quiet question echoing in his bones: "You left a community to come here, and your body is reminding you that you can't run forever. How will you use the time you have left?" In Colorado, amid snow-capped mountains and high blue skies, Deion Sanders wasn't just a hero or traitor in the public eye. He was a man nearing 60, trying to balance the roar of tens of thousands cheering with the harsh whisper of his own body. The pain in his left leg, starting as a gentle knock in the night, turned into non-stop hammering. Doctors started talking to Deion in language he once thought was only for the weak: blood clots, poor circulation, risk of blockage. A series of tests, Doppler ultrasounds, Connecticut scans, led to a chilling conclusion: the blood vessels in his leg were being squeezed by dangerous clots. If they traveled to his lungs or brain, it meant stroke or death. If they stayed, his foot could turn black, necrose, and need amputation. The doctor looked him straight in the eye. No sugarcoating. You've treated your body like a race car with no brakes for over 30 years. Now it's time to pay up. Deion sat on the hospital bed, gown open at the chest, thinking about every time he flew across the grass, every time he pushed through practice with a swollen knee, every non-stop flight between NFL and MLB, every night at Jackson State and Colorado, standing 4 hours in bone-chilling cold. All the moments America called great now added up to a tiny bill in the doctor's hand. Then came the surgeries. First, procedures to open vessels, remove clots, place stents to keep blood flowing. Each trip to the OR added a new scar on his leg, thigh, groin. Anesthesia knocked him out for hours, but waking up brought stabbing fire-like pain spreading from the incisions. Hospital nights were longer than any overtime he'd played. The steady beep, beep of the heart monitor, white lights on the ceiling, sharp antiseptic smell. Nurses came in with more morphine, but the pain didn't vanish. It just retreated a few steps before charging back. Some nights he didn't sleep a minute, not from worrying about game plans, but from every throbbing pulse in his left leg. Finally, doctors uttered the word any speed athlete sees as a nightmare: amputation. They explained that if they didn't remove the necrotic tissue, if they didn't cut away areas blood no longer reached, he could lose the whole leg. The choice was no longer keep the body intact or not, but cut a little to save a lot. Deion lay in bed, looking down at the foot that once ran a 4.2-second 40-yard dash, that made stadiums hold their breath with steps that seemed to glide through air, and heard the doctors say they had to remove the big toe and the second toe. They weren't just two pieces of flesh, they were the push-off points, balance, the grip on grass for explosion. He nodded, signed the form, hand shaking more than any multi-million-dollar contract. When the bandages came off for the first time, when Deion looked down and saw the empty space where two toes had been, the world went silent for seconds. His left foot looked foreign, like it no longer belonged to his body. Skin swollen and red, bandages wrapped tight, and at the end a pale, neatly stitched void. He tried to keep a straight face, cracked a joke with the nurse, but once they left the room he pulled the sheet up, stared at the missing part, and tears welled up before he could swallow them back. Not because he was afraid of looking bad, but because he understood a piece of prime time had died here, in this cold white hospital room, under fluorescent lights, with the steady beep of the heart monitor. But even after losing two toes, he refused to rest. Rest meant what? Staying home, watching TV, becoming an old legend on the couch telling stories from back in the day. That thought was scarier than the scalpel. So while relearning to walk on crutches, he planned his return to the field. At Jackson State and then Colorado, people grew used to seeing Coach Prime no longer striding like the wind but riding a small scooter, or rolling out to the sideline. He wore a boot, pants leg hiked up, left foot wrapped tight, but still smiled, still teased players. "You guys run the rest for me, all right?" While the kids burst out laughing, thinking their coach was cool in a new way, few realized the man was using jokes to hide fear. If he stopped, if he admitted he was tired, hurting, needed a break, everything might collapse, not just the career but the spirit. Inside, Deion was a battlefield. One side was the pride of a man who'd beaten poverty, survived the cliff night, risen after prime prep, rebuilt life with faith. He wouldn't let a few missing toes decide who he was. The other side was quiet despair, every bandage change, every glance at the incomplete body part, every rushed bathroom search for meds. He felt time stealing pieces of him without warning. He took blood thinners, painkillers, blood pressure meds, sleep aids, pill bottles lined up on the nightstand, so many he bitterly joked to himself. "Now I've got a whole playbook of meds." Surgeries piled up until he had to count to remember: one to remove a clot, another for a stent, another to adjust remaining toes for less pain in shoes. Then in 2025, when he thought he'd grown used to pain and hospital visits, another blow landed, quieter but deadlier. During a routine CT for his clot history, doctors found a mass in his bladder. This time it wasn't leg or no leg but life and death in a different sense, cancer. They biopsied, tested, delivered results: malignant tumor, high recurrence risk. Treatment wasn't just pills or light burning, it was full bladder removal, one of the most intimate private organs tied to everyday things we rarely think about: peeing, sleeping through the night, no accidents in meetings or practice. Deion listened as the doctor explained: neo-bladder, a new bladder made from intestine, catheters, months relearning to urinate like a toddler, potty training. At 57, having played in Super Bowls and World Series, he now had to prepare mentally to ask nurses questions like, how do I not leak in the middle of the night? The bladder removal became surgeries 14, 15, 16 in the non-stop string since 2020. The oncologist said post-op he was considered cured, cancer cells gone, but recovery was anything but clean: dropping 20-25 pounds, body weakened, sudden urges, nights up 4-5 times like a kid learning to sleep alone. Deion joked, me and my grandbaby are on the same journey, we both wear diapers. I depend, get it? But behind the joke was the sharp truth, the old prime time, the end zone dancer, the man who walked like limits didn't exist, had died somewhere on that hospital bed. What remained was a man carrying countless scars, 2 missing toes, an artificial bladder, a suitcase of meds, and a stubborn will that refused surrender. Yet even after cancer surgery, when doctors advised rest, easing up, considering stepping away, Deion chose to return to the field. He used a cane, rolled in, rode the scooter, directed while joking with players about the porta potty on the sideline. See that portable toilet? That's for coach, for real, don't laugh. He turned embarrassing things into punchlines so the kids wouldn't fear, so he wouldn't feel like just a patient. Deep down he knew if one day he couldn't step onto the field anymore, couldn't wear a Colorado cap or any teams, couldn't yell let's go anymore, all those scars would crash in like a wave, and he wasn't sure he'd have the strength to stand. Deion's body had lost 2 toes, lost an entire bladder, carried tiny metal pieces keeping vessels open. But the nightmare wasn't necessarily over, because the scariest thing for a legend isn't losing a percentage of the body, it's the question, when all those parts get cut away bit by bit, is there still enough you left to keep living with meaning, or just a name for people to mention on TV? And in the long nights after surgery, looking down at the cut foot, the thinner hands, the tube into his belly, he understood clearer than ever, this wasn't the body getting revenge, it was the body demanding honesty, after a lifetime of being forced to play immortal. Deion's body seemed to have endured enough surgeries, enough medications, enough sleepless nights from the pain in his left leg. Then a new sign appeared, smaller but chilling, at first a slight stinging when urinating, then more frequent bathroom trips than usual, and one morning, urine mixed with dark red streaks like someone had dripped ink into it. A man who'd spent his life in gyms and locker rooms knew his body down to every fiber, and in that instant, Deion knew something was wrong beyond coaching burnout. He hoped it was an infection, a stone, anything antibiotics could fix. But when the doctor looked at the test results and suggested a cystoscopy, the serious look in his eyes spoke before any words did. In the cold procedure room, like every American hospital room, Deion lay on the table, eyes on the screen showing the inside of his body. The scope slid in, the nurse tried small talk to ease the tension, but the moment the doctor paused and pointed to an abnormal rough patch of tissue, no one said anything more. This is a tumor, he explained, voice steady. Days later, the biopsy came back. The doctor sat down, opened the file, took a breath, and said the word America hears on TV all the time, but Deion never thought would attach to his name: cancer, cancer. In one brief moment, all the Super Bowls, World Series, Pro Bowls, All-Pro honors, 4.2-second 40-yard highlights, pick sixes, everything turned to zero. On the table, only 2 words remained: bladder cancer. Treatment options were laid out in language far from stadium noise: stage, grade, recurrence rate. With the type of tumor he had, the doctor was direct: we recommend removing the entire bladder, otherwise the risk of cancer returning is very high. Deion listened to explanations about the procedure: remove the old organ, take a segment of intestine, fashion a new bladder connected to the urethra, catheters, external bags in the early stages. From a man proud of a perfect body, abs, speed, he suddenly saw himself about to become a patient relearning from scratch, something everyone masters as a toddler, urination. No longer about how many pounds he could squat or yards he could run, but how not to leak in the middle of the night. The ego of a sports superstar stripped bare to the core. The surgery lasted longer than any game. When he woke, Deion felt his abdomen heavy, like someone had placed a boulder on it. Tubes and wires everywhere, catheter, IVs, heart monitor leads. He no longer felt the old urge to pee. Instead, steady drips into the bag, hanging by the bed. The first time looking down at his belly, seeing part of his body replaced by a new structure made from his own intestine, he felt a nameless black hole opening inside, both a physical void and an indefinable sense of loss. Cancer didn't just take the old bladder, it took the unspoken belief that my body is an invincible fortress Deion had relied on for 30 years. In the early recovery days, the hardest part wasn't enduring pain, something he was used to, but enduring humiliation. He, who'd sprinted in front of tens of thousands, now had to train to control the new bladder, practice clenching muscles to hold urine, time bathroom trips before the bag filled. Nurses explained in detail, like talking to a child. If you feel, then you need to. He nodded, tried to remember, but every walk from bed to toilet reminded him he was no longer invincible Deion, but a middle-aged man relearning humanity's most basic instinct. Some nights he didn't make it in time. Urine leaked, soaking the white sheet. He rang for the nurse, joked, "Don't tell the boys in Colorado about this," but inside it cut deep. From idle to 20-year-olds, he was slowly becoming his own frail grandfather. Deion decided to shield much of it from his kids. On social media, Shedeur still posted stories throwing passes, wearing Colorado gear, talking NFL dreams. Shiloh still filmed videos trolling his brother, laughing loud, running routes in practice. His daughters still appeared at events, perfectly made up. He watched those images on his phone in the hospital room, where antiseptic overpowered everything else, and he knew he didn't want those faces to change when they saw him in bed. Tubes everywhere, urine bag dangling. He updated them, but always downplayed. "Dad's fine, just a little surgery. I'm recovering great, don't worry." Like in 1997, when he drove off the cliff without telling anyone, this time Deion again chose to carry the scariest part alone. Partly to spare them panic, partly because he still hadn't learned to say "I'm afraid of dying" to anyone but God. Inside, he wrestled with a hard-to-accept mix, feeling betrayed by his own body, and by all the years of arrogance toward health. He remembered times he laughed off doctors' warnings, skipped routine checks, said things like "I can still run, I'm still prime time." Now, lying in bed with a new bladder, he realized he'd treated his body like a rented race car: push full throttle, change tires, fill gas, as long as he finished, just deal with engine failure later. Nights when the hospital fell quiet, he stared at the ceiling, dim lights casting white streaks, and asked the scariest question for someone who'd escaped death multiple times: what if this time God doesn't pull me back? What if all those previous saves were just to bring me to this moment, and accept that it's enough? Weeks after surgery, every follow-up test result hung like a verdict overhead. Then one day the doctor walked in, report in hand, smiling. "Currently, no sign of cancer, no sign of cancer." 3 simple English words that to Deion sounded like the final whistle in a game he thought he was about to lose forever. He closed his eyes, exhaled, thanked God, thanked the medical team, thanked his body for enduring one more cut. Hope flooded in like fresh air through a long-sealed hospital window. He thought about returning to the field, team meetings, young players waiting for his voice. But even in the joy, one truth remained unshaken: he would never again be the old Deion. Not just because of the 2 missing toes, not just the new bladder, not just the crisscross scars, but because deep inside, beyond bone and flesh, he'd passed through a nameless black hole, where every legend, every ego, every invincible story got sucked in and crushed. The man who emerged on the other side still bore the name Deion Sanders, still called Coach Prime, could still smile, joke, inspire, but he was a different version, slower, more fragile, more afraid and kinder to himself. And that was the scar no scan would ever show: but it would stay with him for the rest of his life. The no sign of cancer news was like a temporary reprieve, but it didn't erase the list of names already crossed off Deion's life. When he left the hospital, returned to schedules, locker rooms, players' laughter, those names still followed like a silent, ghostly procession. And among them, 4 men, 4 figures, always stood behind him, even though none lived to see him grow old. His biological father, Mims, was buried when Deion was at the height of his spotlight. Somewhere in a small cemetery, a brown casket lowered, a few old friends, sparse relatives standing around. No cameras, no special news segment. Deion was busy then with NFL, MLB schedules, press conferences, commercials. He came, stood silent, listened to the pastor's prayer, but inside was a tangled mix of half-named emotions. Mims had never truly filled the father role in and out of jail, disappearing, returning, bringing smells of liquor and drugs, then leaving again. Deion grew up without father-son catch in the backyard, without "I'm proud of you" on big days. And now, by the open grave, he still didn't hear it. At the same time, Mims never heard his son say, "I made it," never heard about Super Bowl rings, never saw his son in suits on TV, never witnessed the Fort Myers kid once huddled on the porch steps become someone all America had to mention. Deion carried a hard-to-untangle grief. Pity for a man who was never truly a father, yet the dark mirror who taught him the most important lesson, fear of becoming nothing. Every memory of Mims sitting blankly on the street corner, eyes empty, explained why he'd run his whole life to escape that exact image. At the grave, he only whispered in his head, "I didn't let my life end like that." But saying it brought a heart stab, because it felt both a vow and an accusation against the man in the ground. The funeral for his stepfather Willie Knight was smaller, quieter but warmer. In a modest church, people shared stories the press never asked about: the long-haul truck driver, night shifts, fixing the roof, paying bills, supporting a woman who wasn't his wife on paper but family in reality. Someone recalled Willie coming home at midnight, exhausted, yet teaching young Deion to mow the lawn, repaint the fence, hide fatigue with a smile. Someone told of Willie yanking Deion from a bad crowd, yelling at him then driving him to the field. Sitting in church looking at his stepdad's photo, Deion absorbed what he hadn't wanted to admit when younger: without Willie, there might never have been prime time. Without that half-drunk, half-sober man standing like a pillar in the house, his mom might have collapsed, the home shattered, young Deion fully fallen to the streets. Willie wasn't perfect, he drank, yelled, had nights face down on the sofa, but it's those imperfect people who built the solid enough foundation for a kid to run out of the neighborhood without falling. As the casket lowered, Deion felt the last piece of childhood buried with it, and he whispered, "I owe you more than anyone knows." Then there were funerals not for old men after a lifetime of struggle, but for a child who never got to grow up. A young cousin of Deion's, a black boy just past his early teens, died in a crash, car speeding on a road everyone thought they knew. The funeral had more crying than talking. Tiny sneakers on the casket lid, photos in summer camp shirts, youth league jerseys, smiling with milk still on his lips. For Deion, every young black life cut short like that was a slap to the so-called American dream. People say just work hard, believe, study, play well, and you'll get somewhere better. But that boy never got to work harder, never left the neighborhood, never stepped onto any college field. Standing in the funeral home among cheap white shirts and oversized rented suits on family men's shoulders, Deion felt a strange anger at the system where one mistake, one late break, one stray bullet, one wrong place, wrong time, was enough to take a kid still calling his mom mommy. Anger at himself too, because despite escaping Fort Myers, becoming a symbol, he still couldn't shield every kid like his younger self. One didn't make it out, and his name now only echoed in consoling a mother thinned from too much crying. There was another name few knew, but for Deion one of the deepest private losses: Lieutenant Evis McGee. He wasn't a player, coach, businessman, but a protector, driver, quiet companion beside him for years. McGee opened car doors, stood closest when crowds pushed, checked security first, drove him home after late shoots. He listened to tired phone calls, saw moments Deion removed sunglasses to reveal sleep-deprived red eyes. When McGee died of illness or accident, no cameras recorded, no ESPN breaking news, no 3-minute tribute with dramatic music. His funeral was simple, small church, a few dozen in black, a few hymns. Deion stood to speak, voice breaking as he described the man who'd stood between him and danger countless times without ever asking for credit. Without him, Deion admitted, I might not be standing here talking to you. Sitting down, he understood clearer than ever, the people who kept him alive upright, from slipping so many times, were often the ones never in highlights, never named in the Hall of Fame. They only got named in small funerals, then faded into oblivion. The string of funerals, biological father, stepfather, young cousin, protector, lined up into a haunting list. Each new one forced Deion to face the old but sharpening question. In the end, what will I be remembered for? The ESPN highlights, pick 6 clips replayed every Super Bowl season. The we coming on TikTok, sunglasses, chains memes, or the wounds he unintentionally left in others, the kids splitting homes, players pushed into the portal, prime prep students forced to transfer, nameless people who stood behind him. Nights after another funeral, he came home, sat alone in the living room, TV on but unwatched, replaying old games where a younger him was the star. On screen that version ran backward, caught the ball, juked, dashed into the end zone. Crowd roared, commentators screamed his name. Across the room on the shelf, black and white and color photos of Mims, Willie the cousin, McGee faces no sports channel ever replayed. He understood that when his turn came to lie in a casket, people would say his name, maybe in church, maybe on TV. But what that name meant depended on something titles couldn't answer. What had he done with the people closest to him? Each name called at past funerals became a mirror set for his own departure day. And the question, what will I be remembered for, kept ringing like a bell, no matter if outside it was game day, press conference, or just an ordinary evening after an extraordinary life. A morning at age 58 for Deion Sanders doesn't start with roaring stadium crowds, but with an alarm clock quietly slicing through restless sleep. His back aches dully, like someone shoved a cold iron bar along his spine. The left foot missing 2 toes feels ice cold, numbness creeping from the sole up the calf, and the new bladder silently reminds him he no longer has the luxury of sleeping straight through to dawn. He fumbles to sit up, hands once familiar with footballs now groping for pill bottles, blood thinners, blood pressure meds, nerve pain pills, a few vitamins, the doctor said take just in case. He swallows them one by one with small sips of water, throat dry as a desert. Then he pulls compression socks over the incomplete foot, gritting teeth every time the fabric slides past where the 2 toes were cut away, so he doesn't let out a groan. He stands slowly, taking short steps to the bathroom, flips on the light, faces the mirror. In the mirror isn't prime time with gold chains, cocky smile, eyes daring the world. In the mirror is a 58-year-old man, hair streaked gray, dark circles from sleepless nights, face gaunt after surgeries, eyes tired but still bright in a different way, the way of someone who's seen enough darkness to know the value of a small light. He sighs, but then straightens his collar, adjusts his cap, puts on glasses, not for show but to remind himself, there's still work today, because beyond the bathroom, beyond back pain and pill bottles, is the meeting room where 2 or 3 dozen 18-20-year-old guys are waiting. To the world they're DBs, QBs, WRs, jersey numbers, stats. To Deion they're different versions of the Fort Myers kid from long ago, the child who watched biological dad Mims waste away on the sidewalk, heard stepdad Willie breathing heavy after shifts, smelled liquor and despair mixed in the cramped house. He walks into the room, foot dragging lightly on the floor, but his voice still booms, still firm. He tells them about Pal, about the day a cop pulled him from friends sliding toward gangs, about Mims, the father who never said I'm proud of you, but made him fear becoming nothing, his whole life, about Willie, the imperfect man who gave him his first spiritual backbone, about Prime Prep, the dream to save poor kids turning into a nightmare, bearing his own name, about operating rooms, cold white hospital nights, relearning to urinate like a child, Every story cuts open old scars, but he tells them anyway, because in a few kids' eyes he sees the confusion he once had, and he understands, at 58 his responsibility isn't just winning on Saturdays, but finding ways so these boys don't pay the price he paid for a warped American dream. Out on the field people see Coach Prime stitched on the jacket, see him sitting on the little scooter, see him hugging players after a bad play or big win, but when he gets home, removes the boot, peels off the compression socks, he's a father trying to fix what broke. Shedeur and Shiloh chasing the NFL, no longer beside him every day. They're busy throwing passes, reading coverages, working with agents, shooting commercials. He's proud watching them on screen, but every time he turns off the TV he feels something missing. The days he lost when they were little, because of schedules, flights, divorce fights. His other kids have their own lives, jobs, some still carrying invisible scars from years when parents waged Cold War through tabloids and courts. Deion tries to repair with more frequent calls, surprise visits, longer hugs, apologies he didn't have the courage for when younger.
Hoggle C. Coase.
He didn't have the courage for when younger, but he knows time doesn't give refunds. Bedtime stories, family dinners, school drop-offs, gone forever, no ring or trophy buys them back. So what is Deion Sanders' true legacy? It's not just the stat line only person in history to play in both a Super Bowl and World Series, not just the Gold Hall of Fame jacket, not just pick six highlights replayed on ESPN every season, not just viral quotes online. His legacy, looked at closely, is a mirror held up to America with an uncomfortable question: how much must a black man starting from society's bottom hurt himself, physically and mentally, to be recognized as great? And when he finally gets the applause, the honors, what price did he pay behind the scenes? That's 2 toes amputated, a bladder removed from his body, 14, 15 surgeries, cancer nightmares, 2 shattered marriages, kids who didn't grow up fully under one roof, the prime prep dream shut down, quiet funerals for biological father, stepfather, cousin, bodyguard, people who helped build him but never made the highlights. If you, an American viewer, think you understand Deion Sanders just from highlights and memes, look closer. Look at the foot missing the big toe and second toe, where he once pushed off for bursts that left stadiums breathless. Look at the jagged scars on his belly, where doctors dug, cut, stitched to keep him here. Think of the kids who sat watching dad on TV more than at the dinner table. Remember the prime prep students forced to scatter to other schools when the dream collapsed. Remember that every time you laugh at a cocky Coach Prime quote on TikTok, behind it is a man who stood multiple times on the line between life and death, between dazzling success and private ruin. And if you're on the edge of giving up, debt, broken marriage, illness, feeling like nothing in society's eyes, Deion's story isn't here to lie that everything will be okay. The truth is sometimes it never fully is. Marriages broken don't return to normal, toes cut, don't regrow, cancer gone, but fear of return lingers, kids grown missing a parent, can't go back to age 5 asking dad to make up for it. His story only says one simple brutal thing: you can still choose to do right, even when nothing is ever perfect again. You can still get up early, take pills, pull socks over the hurting foot, walk into a room full of young faces and say, "Don't repeat my mistakes." You can still love more, apologize more, give more, even knowing you can't fix it all. At 58, the tragedy of Deion Sanders is beyond heartbreaking. That tragedy isn't that he's weakened, but that it exposes a cold truth sometimes to become inspiration for the next generation. A man must accept living his whole life with wounds that never heal, on skin and in soul. But the choice to keep living, keep walking, keep teaching, keep loving in that incomplete state, is the most beautiful legacy he leaves. Because it tells the new Fort Myers kids, the children in Jackson, in Colorado, in every poor neighborhood across America, you can break, you can tear, you can lose, but you're not defined by the fall. You're defined by what you do after. If you watched this far, share your thoughts. Not just to honor Deion Sanders, but to honor all the men, fathers, uncles, brothers, coaches, who quietly carry a lifetime of pain on their backs, so this family, community, nation has someone to believe in. Leave a prayer, a comment, a share as a message that you see them, you value them, and you understand that behind every legend on screen is a human learning to keep living with wounds that never disappear. Looking back at Deion Sanders' journey in this story, it's hard not to feel sadness and sorrow for a man America once thought could never fall. Behind Primetime's cocky smile was the Fort Myers kid growing up amid gunshots, sirens, a biological father Mims in and out of prison, a stepfather Willie stumbling from booze, but still trying to be the pillar. From fear of becoming nothing, Deion ran to the top: Super Bowls, World Series, Hall of Fame. But the price was the 1997 night driving off the cliff, 2 shattered marriages, kids growing up seeing dad on TV more than in the kitchen, the prime prep dream collapsing, leaving empty hallways and students transferring mid-year. At an age when he should rest, he stepped into Jackson State, then Colorado, trying to be a teacher for a new black generation, while his left leg clogged with clots, 2 toes amputated, bladder removed, 14, 15 surgeries, turning the body that once ran 4.2-second 40s into a patient relearning to urinate. He attended funerals for biological father, stepfather, cousin, bodyguard Evis McGee, people ESPN never mentions but who kept him alive, and still every morning pulls compression socks over the shortened foot to walk into the meeting room and tell players, "Don't repeat my mistakes." Deion's tragedy is a very American tragedy. How much must a black man from society's bottom self-inflict to be acknowledged? And what scars do family, children, community bear along the way? The lesson for Americans here isn't the myth everything will be okay, but a harder truth to swallow: sometimes things are never fully okay, but we can still choose to love our kids more than career, listen to our body before it's too late, build community instead of just personal statues, and above all choose to speak truthfully about pain, depression, illness, so the new Fort Myers kids don't have to pay the same price Deion did. If Deion Sanders' story of scars on heart and body touches you, please subscribe and share this video so more Americans can see behind the spotlight, a human trying to keep living through pain. Thank you for staying to the end of this journey. See you in the next video, where we'll continue uncovering fates that seem invincible, but are as fragile as each of us.